I think the Prime Minister's looked at the polling, as I have, in relation to Dunkley, and I think he's quite shocked by what he's found. Let's call it and be honest about the Prime Minister's motivations here.
That's Opposition Leader Peter Dutton speaking last month about the Dunkley by-election. And boy, has a lot happened since then. Joining me now to unpack exclusive new polling numbers you can find in the Nightly tonight is its Editor-in-Chief, Anthony Desley. Anthony, tell us, this by-election in Dunkley on the surface is about a Liberal candidate versus a Labor candidate, Nathan Conroy versus Jodie Bellier. So much more than that.
Oh, so much more than that. I'm surprised you even know their names. I was just talking to the newsroom, and so many people, I reckon, across Australia don't even know who the candidates are, but what they do know is that it's a Albo versus Dutton by-election. And the reason I'm holding my phone is I do have the polling hot off the presses that we've got in tonight's edition, and it is remarkable. I mean, look, Labor's going to win. They're way up on the primary vote in terms of they're at 34%, Libs are at 24%, the Greens are at 13%, so you'd think a two-party preferred is going to go Labor's way. But the interesting stuff is when you actually start talking to voters about why they're voting Labor's way. And the two ones that really stand out is when we ask them about, and this is painted dog polling, I should say, but when we ask them about the economy, it's 60-40 in Albo's favour. Now,
Albo's favour?
Now, when a Labor leader is ahead of a Liberal leader on the economy, Peter Dutton's got real trouble. And obviously that's the outcome of the stage 3 tax cuts, right?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Like, it was widely seen as a pretty cynical attempt by Albo to win the Dunkley by-election, and based on these polling numbers, looks like it's worked.
Yeah, it has looked like this worked. And I think it was a day ago or 2 days ago, all these days are starting to blur together for me, but Andrew Carswell, who was obviously formerly very high up in Scott Morrison's office, wrote an exceptional opinion piece for the Nightly, talking about one of Peter Dutton's problems at the moment is he's talking about borders when he should be talking about cost of living. And another remarkable stat from our survey is that when asked about border protection, who was better, Albo or Dutton, it's 49-51 in Dutton's favour. But once again, I mean, that's
a
49
tiny margin.
I mean, we're talking a 2-point difference for Peter Dutton on borders when it's the thing he's knowing about. Like, the one thing you can say about Peter Dutton is he can manage our borders, and he's only just beating Albo. And
especially with this polling done in the wake of sort of a week or two removed from boats of asylum seekers landing on our shores, and all of the mileage that the coalition potentially got out of that doesn't seem to have materialised here. And now Victoria is a pretty safe Labor stronghold, and it has been for a long time. How much does that play into these polling results, do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Victoria is a Labor stronghold, you're right. I mean, Dan Andrews managed to survive so many scandals because of that. But at the end of the day, I think the absolute clear thing, you go to the polls, the number one issue, no matter what anyone says, is always your hip pocket. And right now, Albo is beating Dutton on the hip pocket. And that doesn't bode well for the Libs at the federal election. They need to do something. They need a circuit changer.
Yeah, well, these midterm by-elections are fascinating. They can often be a referendum on the government's performance. Don't often change hands necessarily, but a swing one way or another can be an endorsement or an indictment. Aston didn't go so well for the Liberals last year. That was a pretty unique situation. What sort of swing do you think you'll see here in Dunkley?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned swing. And look, I'll be honest, I spoke to a very high-up Labor Cabinet Minister only about 2 hours ago, Federal Cabinet Minister, and you know what they said to me? Who cares? If we win, we win. That's all anyone cares about. Like, people like you and I, we talk swings. The public doesn't. The public's going to see Albo celebrating a win, and that's all that's going to matter.
Yeah, and I think at the moment he'll certainly take that, and we'll be all watching very closely indeed. Anthony, can we get you to stick around a bit longer?
Yeah, of course.
Richard Marles will be Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence. Penny Wong will be the Senate Leader and the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Don Farrell will be the Deputy Senate Leader, the Minister for Trade and Tourism, and the Special Minister of State. Dr Jim Chalmers will be the Treasurer. Senator Katie Gallagher will be the Minister for Finance, the Minister for the Public Service, and the Minister for Women. Tony Burke will be the Leader of the House, as well as being Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations and Minister for the Arts.
That was PM Anthony Albanese in 2022 announcing his cabinet. It went on for a bit longer than that. 2 years later, though, through thick and thin, Albo has remained loyal to his ministry, but was it the right move? Still with me in the studio is Nightly Editor-in-Chief Anthony Desley. Now, in the fourth instalment of Christopher Dawes' expose examination of Anthony Albanese's first 2 years in government, today he focused on his cabinet. What did we learn from it?
Yeah, like true journalistic style, we left the best for last. And I mean, this is probably the most gossipy, bitchy kind of piece in the terms of this is Labor insiders, Labor politicians, Labor cabinet ministers probably speaking about themselves and rating themselves. And so, you get a bunch of politicians, ask them how they feel about their peers, and it's always very interesting stuff. And look, I won't take too long because the best thing to do is to read it because every word is brilliant. But here's some of the summaries on some of the cabinet ministers. So for Richard Marles, who's obviously the defence minister, the summary is lovely bloke, hard-working, loyal deputy, crap defence minister. The piece on Tanya Plibersek, the People's Princess, Albanese has never forgiven her for backing in the leadership of Bill Shorten and has sent her to the political equivalent of Siberia. And then on Chris Bowen, a former immigration minister, now a climate change minister. Once it was stop the boats, now it's stop the SUVs. What a nightmare.
Well, they're fascinating little snapshots of Albanese's cabinet, but in the broader piece, which really delves into forensic detail into what they all think of each other, I think the one thing that emerges for me is the idea that Albo thinks that stability or the illusion of stability is more important than maybe making changes and replacing people who aren't performing well. Do you think that's going to come back and bite Albo?
Yeah, look, it's interesting. I think getting your cabinet right is such a fundamental piece of politics, and it always has been. And, so it can go kind of two ways. Sometimes when you have a lot of great backbenchers, it becomes a problem because they're desperate, they're ambitious and they're desperate to get into the cabinet. And another problem you have is when there's too many people sticking around. So, look, I think he will need to do a reset. The question for him is he has so many high-profile factional leaders in his cabinet, it becomes very hard to shift the deck chairs, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And what does this article tell us about the workings of the cabinet? Because you mentioned Tanya Plibersek, who had been sidelined. She still seems, despite all of it, to be singing from the same hymn book. Is there unity? Is that just an illusion?
Oh, I think there's never unity in a cabinet, definitely. And in a cabinet that has people who see themselves as a Prime Minister, and, whether that's Bill Shorten, who's still upset that he lost, or whether that's Jim Chalmers, who definitely sees himself as a future leader, or whether that's Tanya Plibersek, who sees herself. And, there's a lot of rumblings around about Tony Burke and how he sees himself as a future Prime Minister too. So all of that's really interesting. I mean, the best thing to do, like I said, is sit down, read the 4-part series, because it is the most fascinating and insightful piece inside the Albanese government since he took on the position 2 years ago.
And comprehensive. I think that's a word that describes it as well. And you can read the full series by Christopher Daw on thenightly.com.au. Editor-in-Chief Anthony Desley, thanks for joining me on The Nightly 5.
Thanks, Ben.